Welcome to part 2 of our binding tutorial for Frankenstein's Fabrics. So what I've done in the hiatus between these two videos is I've basically just cut a couple of pieces of fabric, popped in some binding and just run a couple of quilting lines over it. I'm not going to be too fussy because this is just a tutorial for you guys. So what we need to do now before we attach our binding is we need to trim down our quilt top. So need to find your edge. Now before I did all this, the wadding is straight, so I have a rough idea of how big I want this to be. So what I do is I pick an edge that looks the straightest and I will trim down, and then using that edge as my guide I will trim down the other sides. So what I will do is line up that straight edge on one of the lines on the ruler, find where my wadding is, and cut. Find my straight edge again, make sure the wadding's in there, and cut. So straight edge again, find the wadding, pull it back, pull the fabric back if you can't feel it, so you can see, trim, now at this point if you decide that whatever you're working on has to be a certain size. Now this is, I'm just going to use this as like a placemat, say, so I want it to be at least the 8.5 inches wide. Now what I can do now is I can measure my 8.5 here and straighten up with this line at the bottom, find where my wadding is, and then use that as my guide. So when I get up to here, find the 8.5, match up my straight line on this side, and I can match up a straight line on the top because I know that is straight because that's where I started, and cut. Sometimes when you move in cuts you will find that you do miss a bit in the section, so you just go over that and catch it. So safety back on your blade at all times. You do not want to cut yourself with those, believe me. So now what we do is you need to pick which is your front and which is your back. So that's up to you, depending on which way you've quilted. I've quilted it so the bats are on the back. As you can see, this stitch line is slightly different to the one on the front, and that is just purely the bobbin thread and the top thread. So all our threads are cut off, we're nice and neat, and now we've picked. So this is going to be our front, and in my method of binding I start on the back. So what I do is I leave a tail. Doesn't matter how big, but at least 5 or 6 inches. You don't want to be mucking around with that. Pick a side and I will start. So I'm actually going to start on this side, I think. So I leave my tail and this is where I'll start sewing. Now I've threaded up the machine with purple thread, so this is a bit more visible for you guys. Now my method of binding uses walking foot, front and back. So I'm just going to move this machine further over into the screen so you can see. I'll just adjust the tripod for you as well. Okay, so purple thread, it's all threaded as normal. I do go a little smaller, a little bigger on the first row of binding. When I'm stitching around the front I will make it a bit smaller. So make sure your tail is left. This mat's a bit slippery on this table. So you line your raw edges up. You can pin your bindings if you like, if you feel more comfortable. I don't. It's just one of those things I don't pin anymore. So a few stitches and reverse. And I'm just using the edge of the foot on this side to line up all my raw edges. This keeps it consistent. Okay, now when we get to the end here, we stop approximately 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge on this side. Leave the needle down, lift the foot. Turn your work so you can check so that the foot is lining up again with this side. If it isn't, flip it back and go one more stitch. You will soon figure that one out. So this is all right. I'm right there. So what I do is I lift the needle, always turning your machine forward. Never go backwards, because that will bunch thread up underneath and then you'll have a whole mess to deal with underneath. You fold your binding up at an angle and then you fold it back down so it's lining up with the next raw edge, and this is called mitering. So you'll have like this little triangle flap. Now you need to lift your foot right up, put it all back under, needle back in, a reverse on the miter, and then I continue sewing. So we stop 1/4 of an inch, check, needle up and pull forward, binding up and then binding back. Check your triangle, check your angles. This is where mitering is important. You need to make sure that that angle is pointing into that corner. Now the reason why I reverse sew on a mitered corner is because a corner is the point of most wear and tear. It cops the most abuse and it needs to be more secure. So we continue sewing. Now if you ever get to a corner and you think you're coming in too fast, stop a little bit away from it. So stop about a foot length away from it and manually turn your machine so that you're getting to the right spot. Once you've had a bit of practice at it, you will be able to eyeball it quite easily. It's one of the things that you pick up with quilting, is that you can tell when something is 1/4 of an inch. It's a habit. It's almost like breathing. You can't help it and it happens. So we okay. So now this is our last corner. And don't forget, we're coming up back onto where we started and the tail. Keeps moving. Okay. Don't forget there are teeth on your walking foot, so if you do get stuck, just pull it back out and start again. So now because our tail is back here, we're only going to sew to about here. So just a couple of inches in. Now I reverse at the start and stop again. Just grab my scissors. Okay. So trim all your threads off so they're out of the road. And now this is the fun part, because it means you're almost done. Machine out of the way. Now, what we have here is our two tails. So quite clearly this is too long. So what we need to do is we need to find sort of the midpoint between the two, cut off the excess. Now I do this by eye, you can use a ruler, it's up to you. What I like to do is find the midpoint where that joint is, and then I cut 1/2 inch beyond that point. Now this is because I will be sewing a seam, and I'm not sewing a 1/4 inch seam because my walking foot is not a 1/4 inch seam. My walking foot is closer to 1/2 inch. So as you can see, I've now gone way over that midpoint. So what I need to do now is come back with this one, find the edge of the other one, and cut 1 inch in. And this is because I need to be able to join them. So now you can see that I've got my 2 1/2 inch seams that will join. So I now take them and flip them so that they're back to back, right sides together. Now if you do have trouble with this, I sometimes pin at this point because they like to move. They like to get out of whack, especially trying to wrangle them under the foot. So I just pop a pin or 2 in, depending on how much trouble it wants to cause. Bring the machine back and just pop it under and sew that seam. Take the pins out as you go, so you don't get them stuck under the machine, under the foot. Break a needle. And you've got your join. Now what you can do here is you can take that over to your iron and iron that flat, and that will give you a better finish. Depending on what I'm doing, sometimes I don't iron it. It depends on the fabric too. Some fabrics are better than others. I'll just go pop over and iron that, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now we are ready to finish off this seam. Now this is stretched a little with the heat on the iron, so I will have a tiny pucker, but this is a good example of how to show you how to deal with them. Now because there's a pucker with this join, so what I'll do is start sewing and I stretch my quilt top a little, and then I can see where the pucker is going to end up. So what I want to do is I actually want to hide that pucker in where that seam is, where I've just joined. So hold it down, you can pin if you need, and see we're going to end up with another pucker. So what you do is you have to ease the fabric in. So we've got a little pucker where the join is and a little pucker at the end there. When we turn over, there will be a tiny little pucker on the front. So if you find puckers at a point where it's not near the join where you've started and stopped, like what I could have done there is taken that off and taken a little bit more off that, which I can do. I can show you that as well, which I'll quickly unpick it and show you. So you could take a bit more out of that joint. If you're at a point where, say, it's just in the middle of a length on your quilt and there's nowhere for it to hide, ease it in as best you can. Pin it. You can use a bit of starch if you need to firm up the fabric again. You can do all sorts of little tricks like that to make sure it sits in. So what I'll do is I will just quickly unpick this. And take a bit off and show you how to do that. Okay, so we have a pucker of about 1/4 of an inch, I'd say. So what I will do is simply come in back to where my seam was, where I joined, pop it under the machine, but only come in a fraction away from that original seam. So what I'm doing is so as you can see there, it's now this inner row of stitching. So to remove the bulk from this one, we could take out that first row and then just trim that up a little bit, and that way you're removing the bulk from the joint, because joins are lumpy. You're not going to be able to avoid that too much. So I'll just go and press all that again. Okay, so and we are done. So all of that is done there. Just fix this up. Okay, now for the next part. Turning this over, you will now pull your binding strip around to the front. Now if you don't feel comfortable without pinning, that's fine, but make sure you pin in this direction. Now the reason for that is because you will be sewing this way. You want to be able to pull the pins out. You also don't want to be stabbing yourself as you go. So you just maneuver the fabric around. It will come around. Pop it under your machine with your needle as close to the edge as you can get, because what you need to be doing is sewing on the fold. You are sewing on that nice fold that we made when we made the binding strips. You will find you'll need a little pair of scissors as you do this to trim all the threads up that like to bounce back up. Okay, so what we do is you've got your edge nice and crisp. I dial my stitch length back to 2 and my width back to about 5.2, and I do a small reverse, and then I just slowly stitch. Now as I come to a corner, this is where it gets tricky. The fabric needs to be straight, so it's creating this corner here. I might just zoom in a bit for you guys so you can see that. Okay, that's a bit better. So you can see that this corner from this to this is a 45-degree angle. You then fold that up, and so then it's a 45-degree angle to there, and that your binding strip is now a 90-degree angle. So you need to hold that in place. You can pin it if you choose. I find pins get in the road. So what I like to do is if I get stuck, I use a pair of tweezers to hold it. So you just slowly stitch forward. Now, you can use your wheel if you need to. You only need to catch the first stitch. Then you turn it, foot back down, and you continue sewing. So as you can see there, we've got a very neat corner, and that's all you need to do. You just need to keep maneuvering your fabric make sure that you've got your 45-degree angles. Now, if you get stuck like what's happening here, the foot likes to push back on this fabric that you've folded up. So just put the needle down and hold the fabric in place and use your wheel to manually turn those last few stitches to get there. It will work, you just need a little bit so you're just catching that corner. Now you can go along and hand sew those down if you choose. I don't worry about it, it's not necessary. So I'll just finish this up for you and you can see the finished job. And this will be a very long video which I may have to break up into pieces, but we'll see how we go. Now we're about to hit the join where we joined our binding front and back. This is going to sound terrible, but it will, because it's got the foot is going to bounce over it a little and it's going to sound horrible. The best thing you can do is by pressing your binding flat when you join those seams, by pressing that seam open, you'll be able to reduce it as much as possible. So we're just going to take it slowly. That's it there, that we're on the bump. So I just pull a little at the back. And we're done. So that is machine binding, front and back. What you will have is, oh, there's one way I'm picking, is you'll have a tiny row of stitching just inside the binding on the back of your quilt, which is why I sew it to the back and then stitch it to the front, because otherwise this line of stitching will end up on the front, which won't match with your quilting. So that's binding, back and front. And if you have any questions about binding, please feel free to email me, FrankensteinsFabrics@hotmail.com. You can message me on Facebook. You can make a comment on the website, www.FrankensteinsFabrics.com. You can ring me on 0416 023 637. And if you have any other queries or anything like that, you can contact me in those same ways. And if you'd like to subscribe to my channel to see more of these types of tutorials and other product demonstrations, please just click the subscribe button. Thanks for stopping by.